Amari grew up in Mabula, watching the same scene every morning. Before the sky even began to turn blue, he would hear his mother Nolitha moving around their small room. She tied her old faded cloth around her waist the same way every day, quick and practiced, as if her hands knew the pattern better than her mind. She tried not to make noise, but Amari always woke up anyway. He would watch her pack the vegetables she spent hours preparing the night before, stacking them gently so they wouldn't bruise. When she noticed him awake, she gave him a smile that came with a little laugh, the kind she used when she wanted him to think everything was fine. Even as a child, he could see the truth hiding behind it. Her eyes were tired from too many early mornings and long walks to the roadside market, but she never let that stop her. She brushed his forehead with her rough hand and told him to sleep a little more, even though she knew he wouldn't. As she stepped out into the cold dawn, Amari watched her shoulders straighten, as if she was wearing courage like a coat. He pressed his face to the small window and saw her disappear down the dusty road, alone but determined. Every morning felt the same, yet it shaped him. It taught him what effort looked like, what love looked like, and how silently a mother could carry the weight of a whole life on her back without ever asking for praise. Amari walked to school every morning with dust already covering his shoes, the kind that rose with every step and stuck to his ankles. But he never cared about the dust. He walked with his head high, almost as if pride was sewn inside his chest like a secret thread holding him together. He was not the smartest in his class and not the strongest, but he carried something special inside him. It was the feeling that he had to make every step count, because someone was working hard for him long before the sun came up. Every day he passed the small market where his mother Nolitha sat behind her little wooden table. The table was old and the legs shook a bit when the wind blew, but she arranged her vegetables neatly as if she were preparing them for a celebration. The moment she saw him, her face lit up in a way that almost made him forget their struggles. She would wave at him with both hands, those same hands that had spent years washing clothes, picking vegetables from the fields, carrying buckets, lifting crates, and doing anything that could bring a few coins home. Her hands were rough and cracked in places, but her smile was always soft, like she kept all her pain hidden deep inside where he could not reach. Amari always felt a warm pinch in his heart when he saw her wave. It was not sadness exactly, and not happiness either. It was something in between, something that made his throat feel tight and his steps slow down. Sometimes he wished he could run to her and tell her to rest for just one day, but he knew she would laugh and tell him not to worry. She always said the same thing: "Go, my boy, learn well, I will be fine." And she said it with such simple confidence that he almost believed it, even when he saw her leaning forward to stretch her back or rubbing her wrists after lifting a basket. As he continued walking, he kept looking back until the market faded behind him. On days when school felt heavy or when other kids laughed at his worn-out uniform, he remembered that wave. It was like a small fire inside him, pushing him forward. He wanted to make her proud. He wanted to make the early mornings worth it. He wanted to change the story she carried on her shoulders. At school, his friends talked about toys, phones, and new clothes. Amari did not have those things, but he had something else. He had a reason. When teachers complained that he was too quiet, they didn't know he spent nights studying by a dim lamp, thinking about Nolitha picking vegetables with sore arms. When classmates teased him for bringing the same simple lunch every day, they didn't know his mother woke before dawn to make sure he never left home hungry. Each afternoon when he walked back home, he passed the market again. If Nolitha was talking to a customer, she still found a way to glance at him and smile. And that smile carried him through everything: the hunger, the dust, the long days, the hard moments. It told him he was not walking alone. It told him he mattered. It told him that even in the middle of hardship, love could still feel warm and full and steady. At night the whole house felt different, as if the walls knew their secrets. Amari would sit at the small table with his school books open, the dim lamp giving just enough light to read, but not enough to stop the shadows from filling the room. He tried to focus on his notes, but some nights he could not hold back the quiet tears that slipped down his cheeks. He wiped them fast so his mother would never notice. He didn't want her to think he was weak or tired or scared, even though he was all of those things sometimes. The weight of their life sat on his chest like something too heavy for a boy his age. Behind him, Nolitha would sit on the floor with her coins spread out on an old cloth. She counted them slowly, touching each coin as if it might disappear. Some nights she earned so little that she counted the same pile again and again, hoping the number would somehow change. Amari could hear her whispering to herself, not loud enough for him to answer, but clear enough for him to feel it in his heart. She whispered that one day her boy would break this hardship, that she just needed to hold on a little longer, that everything she was carrying would be worth it when she saw him succeed. Her voice was soft and tired, like someone talking to a dream instead of a person. Those whispers made his throat burn. He wanted to turn around and tell her he would try his best, that he would not waste her sacrifices, but the words never came out right. Instead, he pretended to study harder, blinking away the sting in his eyes. He didn't want her to think her struggle was making him fall apart. He didn't want to add even one more worry to the heavy list she already carried. Sometimes he could feel her looking at him with that mixture of pride and fear only mothers have. He hated that look, not because it was wrong, but because he wished she didn't have to feel it at all. So he forced out a small joke, even when his voice shook. He would say something silly about his schoolwork or pretend to complain about how heavy his books were. It wasn't funny, not really, but he gave the joke a smile anyway, hoping it would lift her mood even a little. And every time, she gave him a tired laugh in return, as if he had pulled her back from a place where her worries were too deep. Her laugh made the room feel warmer. It made the dim lamp feel brighter. It made him believe, even for a moment, that they would both get through this. After her laugh faded, she would tell him to keep studying, reminding him that his future was waiting. And he did, not because the books were easy, but because he loved the woman counting coins behind him more than anything else in the world. School felt like a battlefield for Amari, not the kind with weapons, but the kind where you fight with your stomach, your pride, and your hopes. Most mornings he arrived at class with a hunger that curled inside him like a small fist. He tried to ignore it, but when the teacher explained something long and difficult, his mind drifted to the sound of pots at home, even when there was nothing cooking. During break time, other students opened big lunches wrapped in shiny containers while he sat quietly with his small piece of bread, or sometimes nothing at all. He pretended he wasn't hungry. Pretending was easier than explaining. But the embarrassment still sat in his throat like a stone. His uniform was always a little too worn, and he learned how to walk without drawing attention. When classmates joked about holes in his shoes or the way his shirt didn't fit right, he smiled as if it was nothing. He trained himself to survive the comments, to let them pass through him. But when he was alone, he felt the sting. He wondered if people could see the truth written on him, the poverty and struggle he carried every single day. Still, he held on to his dreams. They were the only things that felt bigger than his problems. Whenever he thought about giving up, he saw his mother in his mind, the way she dealt with her own disappointments. He had watched her so many times trying to sell vegetables that were already losing their freshness. When some of them rotted before she could find buyers, she didn't cry in front of him. Instead, she laughed in that playful way of hers, shaking her head like it was just another small trouble the world threw at her. She would wipe her eyes quickly and tap his shoulder, telling him not to worry, telling him she would find a way. She always said it with such calm strength that he believed her even on the days when the table was almost empty. That memory became his shield. On days when teachers scolded him for being distracted, or when hunger made his hands tremble while writing, he reminded himself of her laugh. On days when classmates bragged about new backpacks or talked about weekend outings he could never afford, he pictured her standing at the market, chasing away her own sadness with a smile. It made him stand a little taller. It made him try a little harder. He told himself that he could not let her down. She faced her battles with courage and hope, so he tried to face his with the same spirit. Every test he studied for, every early morning he forced himself awake, every moment he held back tears in the bathroom at school, he did it knowing she was fighting too. And somewhere inside him he kept a quiet promise. He would not let hunger stop him, he would not let embarrassment drown him, and he would not let his dreams die. Not while Nolitha was out there believing in him more than he believed in himself. The day the university letter arrived felt unreal, almost like the world took a breath and waited. Amari had come home from school tired and dusty as usual. He pushed open the door expecting the same quiet room, the same dim light, the same smell of vegetables Nolitha had cleaned for the next morning. Instead, he saw an envelope on the table with his name written in careful handwriting. For a moment he just stared, confused, thinking maybe it was a mistake. Maybe someone else shared his name. His hands shook as he picked it up. He felt his heart pounding so hard it hurt. When he opened it and saw the word accepted, everything around him blurred. His knees almost gave in. He had dreamed about this moment so many times, but dreaming about it was different from seeing it printed on paper. It felt too big, too impossible, too far from the life he knew. Nolitha was standing behind him, wiping her hands on her cloth, waiting for him to say something. When he finally managed to whisper, "Mama, I got in," she let out a sound he had never heard before, a mix of shock, relief, joy, and years of hidden pain breaking open. She didn't even wait for him to finish reading. She rushed forward and wrapped her arms around him so tightly he could barely breathe. Her laugh came out mixed with tears, loud at first then soft and shaky. She cupped his face as if she needed to make sure he was real. The pride in her eyes was so bright it made him look away for a moment. She kept repeating, my boy, you did it," as if saying it made her believe it all over again. Amari felt tears running down his face, even though he tried hard to hold them back. All the nights studying by the dim lamp, all the mornings walking to school hungry, all the times he hid his sadness suddenly rushed through him. He wasn't crying because he got accepted. He was crying because he wished his mother never had to work so hard for him to get here. He wanted to say he didn't deserve it, that she deserved more than he could ever give. But before he could speak, Nolitha took his face in her hands and looked at him with a seriousness he rarely saw. She told him not to feel guilty, not even for a second. She said his future mattered more than her sleep, more than her tired back, more than any worry she carried alone. She said she would work double if she had to. She would sell more vegetables, find more customers, stand longer under the hot sun. She said all of it with a smile that looked too brave for a woman who was already exhausted. Amari shook his head, telling her she didn't have to do more, that he couldn't let her break herself just so he could study. But she pressed a finger to his lips and told him to listen. She said she wanted him to go further than she ever could. She wanted him to sit in classrooms she never had the chance to enter. She wanted him to have a life where he didn't have to count coins at night or pray that vegetables sold before they spoiled. She wanted to see him walk into a future that looked bigger than Mabula, bigger than the market, bigger than anything poverty had tried to trap them in. Her voice cracked as she said it, but her smile stayed steady. She wasn't pretending. She truly believed he was worth every sacrifice she had made. The room felt full, almost too small to hold everything they were feeling. Amari kept staring at the letter, scared it would disappear if he blinked. Nolitha wiped his tears with her thumb and teased him gently, asking if he would still remember her when he became a big university student. He laughed through his tears and hugged her again, holding her the way she had always held him when he felt small. He didn't want to let go. It felt like years of hope were wrapped in that hug. Later that evening, when the excitement softened into quiet joy, they sat together on the floor sharing a simple meal. Nolitha talked about how she would save money, how she would make sure he had enough for books and transport. Amari listened, feeling both grateful and guilty. He knew she was planning sacrifices she didn't name. He knew she would work longer hours. He knew her body was already tired from years of lifting, walking, bending, and carrying. But she kept smiling, as if her tiredness didn't matter anymore. In that moment, he made a silent promise to himself. He would study harder than ever. He would use every opportunity wisely. He would not waste a single day at university. He would finish his degree no matter how hard it became. He would make her sacrifices worth something. He would give her a life where she didn't have to wake up before the sky turned blue. He didn't say these words out loud, but he knew she felt them when he reached for her hand and held it gently. Her hands were still rough, still marked by years of work, but to him they felt like strength. They felt like love. They felt like the beginning of a new chapter neither of them had ever imagined. University life hit Amari harder than he expected. He had imagined big classrooms, new friends, and a fresh start. Instead, he found himself counting every coin, walking long distances to save transport money and eating meals so cheap they barely filled his stomach. Some days he survived on a cup of tea and a piece of bread. Other days he stretched a small bowl of rice to last 2 meals. He told himself he was fine, that many students struggled, but it still hurt when he watched others buy food without thinking or walk into shops with full wallets. He kept his pockets turned inside out, checking for coins he already knew weren't there. It became part of his routine, a habit he didn't like but couldn't stop. The loneliness surprised him too. At home, he always had his mother's presence, even if she was tired or quiet. At university, no one checked on him. No one asked if he had eaten or slept well. His room was small and empty, and at night the silence felt heavy. He studied on his narrow bed with the window slightly open, listening to the sound of faraway voices from students who lived with friends or had people to talk to. Sometimes he looked at the ceiling and felt a sting in his chest, a mix of fear, stress, and longing. He missed home. He missed the warmth of Nolitha's voice filling every corner of their tiny house. He missed having someone who understood him without him needing to say a word. Assignments piled up and lectures moved fast. He struggled to keep up, not because he wasn't smart, but because everything felt overwhelming. He had to use old second-hand books with missing pages. He stayed in the library until it closed, reading the same paragraph again and again until he understood it. Some nights his eyes burned from tiredness, but he stayed awake anyway. He remembered the sacrifices waiting for him back in Mabula, and that memory pushed him to keep going even when he felt like breaking. But every time he felt himself sinking, his phone rang. And the moment he saw his mother's name on the screen, something inside him warmed. Nolitha never let her voice sound tired when she called. She started each conversation with a joke, usually about her day at the market. She told him how she chased customers like a hunter chasing prey, how she argued about prices like a warrior in a battlefield, how she used funny tricks to convince people her vegetables were the best in the world. She made her stories dramatic on purpose, adding sound effects and exaggerating her movements until Amari laughed so hard he forgot his stress for a moment. Even when his eyes were burning from studying, he laughed along. He didn't want her to know how close he was to giving up some days. He didn't want her to hear the tiredness in his voice. So he spoke cheerfully, asking about her day, teasing her about her dramatic stories, pretending everything was easier than it really was. Deep down he knew she could hear the truth anyway. A mother's heart always hears the things a child tries to hide, but she never pushed him to admit anything. Her jokes were her way of lifting him without making him feel weak. Sometimes she would pause and ask gently, "Are you eating, my boy?" And Amari would quickly say yes, even though the answer wasn't always true. She would hum softly, pretending to believe him, and then start another joke to lighten the moment. She never told him how hard things were for her back home either. She didn't say how long she stood under the sun or how her back ached. She didn't say how slow business was on some days. Instead, she kept the conversations filled with laughter because she wanted him to feel strong, not burdened. After the calls, Amari sat quietly for a few minutes, holding the phone to his chest. The room still felt lonely, but not as cold. Her voice stayed with him like a warm echo. It reminded him who he was fighting for. It reminded him that he wasn't alone, not truly. He had someone cheering for him from miles away, someone who believed in him more than he believed in himself. He returned to his books with a new kind of strength, the kind that didn't come from rest or food, but from love. Whenever he felt like stopping, he imagined Nolitha standing at the market with her faded cloth tied around her waist, smiling at him with her brave eyes. He imagined her telling customers about her son at university, how proud she was, how she believed in his future. That thought carried him through the hardest nights. University life continued to hit him with challenges, but he refused to fall. He held onto the voice that kept him going, the laugh that made everything feel possible, the love that stretched across distance and softened the weight of every struggle. And each night, as he closed his books and prepared for another long day, he whispered a promise to himself. He would not waste her sacrifices. He would keep going, no matter how hard it became. Graduation day arrived like a dream Amari had been holding onto for years. The campus was filled with music, loud cheers and flashes from cameras that lit up the air like tiny stars. Students in bright gowns walked around laughing, hugging, taking pictures with their families. The smell of flowers, perfume, and excitement mixed together, making everything feel bigger, brighter, and heavier. Amari stood in the middle of the crowd with his own gown sitting neatly on his shoulders, but his mind was not on the celebration happening around him. His heart was beating fast, almost too fast, and his hands trembled slightly as he held his cap. He looked around again and again, searching through every face passing by. He wasn't looking for friends or classmates or lecturers. He was looking for one person only, the person who made this day possible, the person he owed everything to. His mother. People around him shouted names, waved at each other, cried, laughed, and posed for photos, but he barely heard them. All he could think was, where is she? His chest tightened with every passing minute. He remembered all the nights Nolitha whispered her hopes into the darkness, all the early mornings she walked to the market before sunrise, all the times she told him to keep going even when he felt he had nothing left. Today was the day he wanted her to see what her sacrifices created. Today he wanted her to stand beside him and feel proud. He kept searching the crowd, rising on his toes every few seconds, wiping his palms against his gown. Then, through the busy movement of families and students, he saw a familiar figure slowly stepping onto the field. A woman in a simple, worn dress that she had ironed carefully at home, even though the fabric was old. Her shoes were clean but used, her hands clutched a small bag, and her shoulders looked smaller than he remembered. But her smile, her shy, gentle smile, was the same one that had given him strength for years. Nolitha looked around nervously, as if she wasn't sure she belonged in such a fancy place. But the moment her eyes found Amari, her whole face lit up, and she raised a hand to wave at him with the same warmth she used when he was a little boy walking to school. Something inside Amari melted at the sight. His throat tightened, and his eyes burned with tears he didn't bother hiding. For a moment everything around him blurred. The music, the cheering, the laughter, none of it mattered. All he could see was his mother taking slow steps toward him, her smile trembling as if she too was swallowing tears. He walked toward her as if pulled by his heart, his legs moving before his mind could think. When he reached her, Nolitha reached out and touched his gown with shaky fingers, almost as if she needed to feel it to believe it was real. "You did it, my boy," she whispered, her voice cracking with emotion. "You truly did it." Amari couldn't speak. The words stuck in his chest. All he could do was pull her into a hug, the tightest hug he had ever given her. She held him with the same strength she used when he cried as a child, the strength that carried both of them through struggle after struggle. He buried his face in her shoulder, and for a moment the world disappeared. It was just the two of them, a mother who never stopped fighting, and a son who refused to give up. He thought about the days he walked to school with hunger biting at his stomach. He thought about the nights he studied by a dim lamp while she counted small coins on the floor. He thought about her jokes during university, the silly stories she used to make him laugh even when he wanted to break down. And now she was standing here in her old dress and worn shoes, looking at him as if he was the greatest success she had ever seen. She held his face in her hands and said softly, "I knew you would make it. I always knew." Amari felt pure gratitude flooding through him, stronger than anything he had ever felt before. Not gratitude for the degree in his hand, but gratitude for the woman who had carried him through every step of the journey. Gratitude for her laughter, her courage, her sacrifices, and her love. Gratitude for the fact that she believed in him even when he doubted himself. As they stood there together, the cameras flashed around them, capturing moments for families. But the only picture Amari cared about was the one in his heart, him in his graduation gown, standing beside the woman who made it all possible. And in that moment, he knew one thing without doubt. No achievement in his life would ever matter more than making her proud. Amari held his diploma so tightly that his hands shook, not from fear but from everything the moment meant. As he walked toward his mother, the world around him seemed to move in slow motion. Nolitha stood there with her hands pressed against her mouth, her eyes already filled with tears. When he came close enough, she let out a soft laugh, the kind that sounded like both joy and years of hidden pain breaking free at the same time. Her tears rolled down her cheeks, but her smile stayed strong, shining with pride he had never seen so clearly before. Amari felt his chest fill with something heavy and warm. In that second he understood fully that she was the reason he made it this far. Every early morning she woke before the sky changed color. Every long day she spent under the sun selling vegetables. Every tired smile she used to comfort him. Every joke she used to hide her own struggles. All of it led to this single moment. When he reached her, he didn't wait. He dropped his diploma to his side and wrapped both arms around her. He hugged her tighter than he ever had before, holding on as if he could somehow thank her through the strength of his embrace. She held him back just as tightly, her hands trembling against his back. For a moment neither of them spoke. They didn't need words. Their hearts already understood everything. Amari finally whispered that it was her turn now, that she had carried him far enough, that she could rest. Nolitha shook her head and laughed softly again, brushing his tears away with her rough hands. But he meant it. Standing there in his gown, with his mother in his arms, he made himself a promise he knew he would keep. He would work hard enough to give her the peace she never had, the comfort she always deserved, and the rest she had waited for her whole life.